All right, gentlemen, we're live. Going to let people trickle in here. Good morning to both of you. Okay, good. That's good for the audio medium too. I guess this won't make it to the podcast. We'll start the podcast up in a second. For people watching, please excuse my hair. It's crazy right now, but it will be cut in the next 30 minutes, 3 hours, I should say. So it won't look quite this crazy. I'm gonna let people trickle in for a couple more seconds here before we get going on the podcast recording of this. But it's going to be a busy episode for you guys. Official visit recap from this past weekend, official visit preview for the upcoming weekend, discussing unofficial visitors, which there's some big time names, and then I think just kind of taking the temperature of FSU recruiting. A lot of people are concerned out there. We're going to have 3 experts on here talk about whether we're concerned or not. So it's going to be the conversation for today. All right, let's get going. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to On the Bench. I am your host for today's episode, Brendan Sinone, joined by my OTB brethren, Zach Blostein. Zach, hello.
Thank you for calling me brethren.
You're welcome. And then Chris Nee as well. Chris, what up?
Good morning.
Chris, are you broken yet from June? How we doing here? It's the back half. You all right?
I'm fine.
All right.
Light at the end of the tunnel. Insight.
You don't look as crispy now. It's more like the browning, like it went from red to more of a nice brown shade. So I think
the camera's just further away. I'm still very red.
Okay, got it. All right, gents. We, as always, have a lot to get to, but this feels like a particularly loaded episode with us trying to put together official visit recaps from this past weekend with official visit previews with this upcoming weekend. And it's a massive weekend from just a pure numbers standpoint with FSU has coming in. So we're going to get into that here. Also talk about some unofficial visitors as well. Before we get into all of it, though, shout out 3 things. First off, Chattanooga Whiskey, sponsor of On the Bench. It is one of the premier craft whiskeys out there. My favorite craft whiskey, and it was a favorite before they even sponsored us, nestled into the mountains of Chattanooga. They do an amazing job of bourbon, of rye, of experimental batches. They've won multiple awards because it is such an outstanding product at a great value. You can find it all within the Southeast. Go to your local liquor store. You can go and order online as well at sealbacks.com. So yeah, Chattanooga Whiskey, an amazing sponsor for us, an amazing product. Love their stuff. I think Dane has gone through almost an entire bottle so far with some help. Don't want to out him too much, but he's had some help. Zach's enjoyed it as well with his family members. So it is a fantastic whiskey to share with the people you care about. Then also, Buyer Sinone is sponsored by
the Turner Group.
The Turner Group.
The Turner Group. Colin and Amy Turner doing an amazing job buying, selling homes in Central Florida, throughout the state of Florida. You are in the home buying process or you want to enter the market, I would highly recommend you reach out to Colin Turner at the Turner Group. You can email him at getstarted@theturnergroup.com. And for Florida State parents who are looking to send their little ones to Tallahassee in the coming months here, don't rent in Tallahassee. Much better bang for your buck if you buy. Obviously, some inherent risk in buying, but Colin Turner can walk you through how that ends up being a very lucrative risk, and the reward at the end of the tunnel is pretty stellar. And then finally, a shout out to the boys at X's and Knowles. They put together an amazing product with Mike Norvell this week where he sat down on the YouTube channel for those guys and gave him an hour of his time to talk about some schemes, some philosophies. Got to see Mike have fun. X's and Knowles has been with us at Knowles 24/7 for about a year now. What an amazing year it's been. And I think this was a highlight of their respective careers. One of the best things I've been, what's the word I'm looking for? Associated. Thank you, Chris. The coffee is flowing right now. But yeah, that's on their YouTube channel, and it's on Knowles247.com as well. The response to it has been awesome. We're thankful for that opportunity. Check that out. So let's get into it, gentlemen. FSU is in the midst of June here. That means official visits constantly. It means camps. It means a ton of balancing for this coaching staff as it tries to assemble its recruiting class. Now, where I think I want us to start is with the little Buyer Sinone as we take the temperature of where FSU is sitting right now, because Florida has had a ton of commits the last few days. FSU fans are getting anxious about that, kind of wondering when the next commit is going to come for the Seminoles. It's been about 2 months. There's been some prospects getting taken off the board, or seemingly so. So let's go Buyer Sonone here, sponsored by
The Turner Group.
Turner Group.
Buyer Sonone. FSU's recruiting strategy for June will ultimately work out for the Seminoles. Zach, I'm going to throw this to you. Before you give it the Buyer Sonone answer, maybe explain what the recruiting strategy has been for FSU.
Yeah, so basically, they like to backload their June official visit slate. They're going to host, or they're slated to host, more official visitors this upcoming weekend, June 23rd to 25th, than the entire rest of June combined. I believe it's 14 for the rest of June. There was 6 the first weekend, 2 midweek, and then 6 last weekend. Whereas this upcoming weekend, there will be about 15 to 16 prospects on campus for official visits. So that is the strategy. That's not something new. That's something that Mike Norvell has done throughout his career at Florida State. The past 2 cycles, when Florida State's been able to host official visitors within the month of June, they've backloaded their slate towards the latter half of June. That last weekend's always the one that has the most number of prospects on campus. And, with that strategy, there's high risk, high reward, right? Because a lot of those prospects, if they're talented, they're going to be taking visits to other schools throughout the month of June, the other 3 weekends. And because of that, sometimes one of those prospects might find the school that they feel is the spot for them, and they might decide to end their recruitment early or start favoring that school very heavily. We've seen that happen with some prospects. If FSU is able to get the targets they want on campus for that final weekend, then we see where the reward happens, right? Because a lot of these prospects are making decisions early on in July or before their seasons, and FSU gets that last impression at the end of June before they head into decision-making mode. My answer here is I'm going to say Sonone, because I think that Florida State will land some talented prospects that are going to visit this weekend. But I feel as if I'm somewhere in the middle, right? I don't think all the concern that is happening among the fan base is necessarily warranted over the past few days. There's been some concerning developments, right? Like we'll talk about a guy like Jason Zandamela, who got crystal ball to USC after visiting there last weekend. These things are bound to happen, right? Like prospects are going to go and like places that they're visiting. I wrote an article today that one of FSU's recruiting objectives should be to maintain that Jason Zandamela is going to stay on the visitor list for this upcoming weekend. Like that's been the plan for months. I think that FSU should utilize the first weekend with prospects that they have a better chance at, and maybe some of the midweek stuff. They should probably vet prospects and just make sure that they're seriously considering Florida State. And I know the FSU staff feels confident about their chances with guys once they get them on campus, especially for an official visit, because that's part of what they sell in a recruiting pitch to a prospect. But yeah, to me, I think you limit yourself some by backloading completely on an official visit slate. And I'm not saying, obviously they hosted guys like last weekend. I think they knocked it out of the park with probably half or a little bit more than half of the prospects that were on campus the June 16th through 18th weekend. I think FSU leads for multiple of those guys. But I think you probably should spread out the visits a little bit more. And because I think, you limit yourself. And we'll see what happens over the next few days, right? Like if Jason Zandamela stays on the visitor list, then I feel better about where FSU stands with some of those, with this question at hand. But yeah, I would have liked to see like maybe some of these guys spread out amongst the June official visit slate a little bit more, especially that first weekend. That's the weekend I always look at. And that's been a trend, right? Like those are the guys that are least likely to end up in the class for whatever reason, right? Because they're going to go on official visits the rest of the month. And FSU, if they don't vault into the lead after that visit, then it's unlikely that they're probably going to land those kids. So yeah, I would just say Sonone, because I think I would like to see the strategy spread out a little bit more. Maybe just those final 2 weekends, maybe make them more equal in numbers. But I'm very interested to see how the next weekend change goes for Florida State when it comes to how they fare up for some of these recruits that'll be on campus this weekend.
Chris, Buyer Sonone, before you get into the Buyer Sonone, are you Buyer Sonone surprised that Zach might have a little skepticism or anxiety about recruiting?
I mean, Zach's response I thought was pretty well balanced, truthfully.
Oh, it's not fun when we're balanced. Sorry.
So
continue.
To the original question, I'm Sononing it. I'm not concerned because it's June. And my view of recruiting has drastically changed here in the last, I'd say, 12 to 18 months. It used to be, yes, you wanted to acquire 25 high school kids and have the best high school class in the country. That used to be recruiting. That was the bread and butter of recruiting for a long time in the time I've done this in this business. It's not that anymore. It's talent acquisition. It's a roster. It's a salary cap. Portal is involved in it. FSU has shown they can construct a roster in a good way. Now, does FSU need to recruit at a high level in high school? Yes. I'm not dismissing any concerns with, maybe DN, linebacker board, D tackle boards being kind of thin, feeling like you're slipping a little bit, needing to do some things there. I get those people and the concern there, but I still think there's a degree of like, it's June, let it play out. But I have a tough time really caring, like overly being concerned about it. If FSU walks away from June, and I'm saying June into July with kids committing with, say, 6 to 8 new additions of high-level prospects that they truly want, a guy like a Charles Lester, for example, guys of that magnitude, guys they have targeted for a long time, and their class is sitting at, say, they have, 11 right now, I believe it is, so let's throw 2 out. We lose 2. Jaworski Abrams does what he's been teasing for a month, and somebody else goes. You're at 9. You add 6. You're at 15 all of a sudden. How many high school kids is FSU going to sign this year? 20? So you're 75% done. You really like the 75% you have. It's what you've wanted. You got 5 spots left, and then you go portal hunting. That's how you're going to fill out your class. That's going to be your talent acquisition. Like, I have trouble getting into panic mode, viewing it in that prism. Do I want FSU to recruit the best high school class in the country? Would I love if FSU was having the surge today that Florida has had this week? Yeah, that would be fantastic. We'd sell the hell out of it. It'd be great. It's great to get great players. I'm not acting like it's not. But at the end of the day, it's about building your best roster and having the best team capable. And I have a tough time with the current program that we're covering acting like they haven't done a good job of doing that. There are areas they can be better at. I don't want people to think that I'm completely saying like they're doing a phenomenal job. There are areas I wish they were recruiting at a better clip at. Linebacker recruiting, bigger board would be nicer. But again, and I had this conversation with Zach yesterday, to me, linebacker might be the most unimportant position on FSU's entire roster of your primary positions, in the sense of having to acquire a lot of guys. If FSU doesn't get a high-level high school linebacker this year, they're going to be arguably the most interesting portal school for a linebacker in the country, because they're losing 2 guys who are going to play a ton of snaps with no clear-cut next guy. And I know that's where the concern comes in for folks. But at the same time, FSU has shown that it can go in the portal and acquire guys and do that. I don't know that any high school kid FSU can acquire in this year's class at linebacker is going to help them at linebacker next year. So which holds more value for them, the high school kid or the portal kid? And that's a dangerous game to play. But I think FSU is pretty comfortable playing it, I guess is the way I would put it. So, no, I'm not overly concerned. I do think it's important for FSU to close out this month effectively. Historically, Mike Norvell has built up that last weekend of June to be their big recruiting time, closing the summer with a little bit of a momentous push of adding more kids, adding high school recruits. It is important for FSU to get there. It's important for them to close high-level guys like a Charles Lester. A guy like Jason Sandomelo is one that if they lose to USC, it would be a true loss, because for so long in that recruitment, they were the pace card. They set the pace. So I don't want people to think that like there aren't things that are concerning. But I think there's been a whole lot of panic, mainly for 2 reasons. One, FSU has gone basically 62 days, I think it is now, without a commitment since Landon Thomas on April 17th. And the other reason is simple. One of their rivals has surged this week and had a phenomenal week and pushed their class to top 2 or 3 in the country.
Yeah.
And they've done a great job. I get that. But no, I think that's a crazy reason to get in a panic, because I don't think FSU is panicked. If FSU is panicked, I'd be more concerned. But yes, there are positions where FSU can do better. So again, similar to what Zach said, there is some in the middle of the Buyer to Sonone part of it. But in general, no. I'm Sononing it.
I want to talk about the linebacker discussion we had yesterday out at the bench. To me, while linebacker might not be the most important position when it comes to acquiring a ton of talent, I think it's important for Florida State to build for the future. And while they're not going to land a guy out of high school that's likely to contribute as a starter for them next year, or maybe even as a two deep guy, I think that the talent in the linebacker room is not something that FSU should be comfortable with um, moving forward. Like I don't know if I'd be comfortable with FSU's linebacker core next year after losing Tatum Bethune and um, Kalen DeLoach as a linebacker core that can be, competing for ACC championships and beyond that, right? I think the biggest concern for me, right? You look at Florida's class, and I'm going to compare classes here, right? Florida has 3 linebackers that rank in the top 100 in our rankings. Florida State can't scratch the surface with the linebacker that is of blue chip status, right? They hosted Edwin Spillman earlier this month, the first weekend of June, like I was talking about. He has since said that he's focused on Tennessee and Ohio State. Michael Boganowski is making his first ever visit to Florida State this week for an unofficial visit, which is positive, right? You're getting him on campus for multiple days. So I'm not discounting that, but the chances with that kid trying to pull him out of Kansas, he's the top player in Kansas, and Kansas State is going to host him on an official visit this weekend. I'm not going to predict him to end up in FSU's class. So that's where the concern lies for me, right? Florida's coming off a 6-7 season. They probably have a worse outlook this season than pretty much, any legit school that Florida State's recruiting against. And they have landed 3 top 100 linebacker prospects already, including a 5-star edge who could be considered a linebacker that I'm not even including in that, in those 3 that they landed yesterday. So that's where the concern lies to me. I don't think Florida State should be getting lapped by an in-state rival when, they beat said in-state rival and their long-term program outlook looks better than that school. So that's where the concern lies for me when you're comparing classes and just the effort and recruiting ability. I think that's where I find concern. And we had a good, Chris and I had a good debate about it yesterday about, the level of importance of high school recruiting when you compare it to, what FSU can go and get in the portal, which I think, like you said, Chris, I think they're absolutely going to do that. And that's their full plan, is to go take a portal linebacker. But the only issue with that is we saw with safety this year, when FSU goes into that market, are they going to be able to land a guy or even find a guy that fits? Because that's not always a guarantee. You can't guarantee out of the portal that you're going to find a player that fits what you need. We saw it this year with safety, right? Florida State did not land a safety out of the portal, and they desperately tried to add one. And you could say, maybe none of those guys would have been absolute difference makers for Florida State this season, but they needed a safety, and they did not get one. So my argument there is that it's not always a certainty that you will get what you want out of the portal, because you don't know what's going to go in. Whereas high school, you can evaluate a large crop of prospects, and there will be multiple that fit what you need.
Yeah. And just to add one last point to it, and I brought this up yesterday, I use O-line for an example. I love Lucas Simmons. I think Lucas Simmons is capable of being an extremely good college football player who has a pro potential. Lucas Simmons is valued higher than Jeremiah Byers. On FSU's football team this coming season, Jeremiah Byers' value is drastically higher than anything Lucas Simmons can or should provide.
Yeah,
because that's how this works.
If we're talking about Florida State's football program in 3 years, Lucas Simmons is.
But I don't know that we should view football programs or any college athletic programs anymore as multiple year things. Like, I kind of feel like that has gone away. It has wholeheartedly gone away in basketball. Now that's different. It's much smaller numbers. You've got to build in football. You do have to have a foundation that carries over year with a little bit of built in. But at the same time, FSU's ability to get good quick here has largely happened because their ability to go pluck the portal over their actual high school recruiting. Yeah. Now, it is important for them to be a better high school recruiting school. And this is a very important cycle for that. And there's positions where they have to do that. defensive end is one we keep talking about. Linebackers one, I think we all would like to be better. But again, I think the strategy in this cycle is that they'd probably prefer portal kid over high school kid. Just be cut through it all and be very direct about it.
I don't think that's a good strategy, is my argument. I think you have
But
to
I don't
build,
think any high school kid they get this year helps them next
it's not
year,
about
and they
that.
need help next year.
It's not about what can immediately help next year. I know you're
Right.
saying it's a 1-year roster build, but Florida State does not want to operate like that. They don't want to operate where they are desperately trying to get a linebacker that could start for them this year, but next year.
But I think they've done that at a lot of positions, and now we're getting to a point where it's more narrowed on the positions they have to do that at. And linebacker is an example where they will probably have to do that at.
Do you think?
But there's a lot of
Don't you think
positions
they would
that's not going to be
prefer?
true.
Don't you think they would prefer having a high school kid that they develop that's a good prospect and can play like year 2 or year 3 versus banking on the portal and just hoping that a great prospect enters that can start for them that year?
Yes, but the truth is they probably would have needed to get that individual 2 or 3 classes ago, and they
True.
didn't. They got Omar
But-
now 1 class removed and Blake in the class that just enrolled, and those are 2 guys that we believe will be factors at that position long term. Prior to that, there's not a whole lot to point to. I mean, I'm not trying to knock down DJ Lundy. He's been an excellent number 3 at the position and valuable, but that's probably all he ever should be. And I guess that's the best way I can put it is I think FSU's belief is to be good at linebacker in 2024, presuming Bethune and Deloach are both departed from the program as expected, that they're going to have to go and pluck somebody who has playing college experience and is physically prepared to handle the role then and there. And they're not going to find that in high school ranks in this class. They're going to have to go and get that. And the hope is that in adding that guy, you allow a guy like Blake and Omar to catch up, giving you 4 to 5 in that room that you hope can be capable. I just think that's sort of the mindset they operate with. I think that's how they look at viewing the construction of a roster. And a lot of us are still stuck in the old mindset of 25 high school kids, number 1 class in the country. In 3 years, we're going to be really good, or in 2.5 years, we're going to be really good with that group. I just don't know if that's how FSU operates. I don't want people to think I'm saying this right now to make an excuse for the lull we're having in recruiting. I have felt this way dating back to December, January. I got in arguments with you guys over text messages about, at the end of the day, it's all about talent acquisition. Like, rankings are a beautiful thing, but it's about building a good football roster. And that's where I think FSU is. And I think they're comfortable doing it in a variety of ways, that they're not solely going to rely upon high school like some programs still seem to be. But there are plenty of programs that are very much portal hunters, as FSU has seemingly become.
So, backtracking about 10 minutes ago, I think Chris said he was Sononing it, but he meant to say he was buying it, just to clarify.
What, panic? I'm not panicked.
No, whether their strategy will work out in June. For June.
No, I think they're going to acquire multiple high school kids. And I think they're going to have a good high school class.
Another thing we should have determined, Brendan, is what does workout mean?
You're the one who wanted that prompt.
I know, but we should have clarified that.
Okay, so quickly, position by position for 24. Quarterback, they already got their dude. Running back, they've got one. Are they going to get another one? That's to be determined. I
love when Chris goes position by position.
Wide receiver, I'm not the least bit concerned. If Abrams walks, it is what it is. If he stays, it's great. He's a speedster. BJ Gibson, exceptionally talented. Pro baseball would probably be the biggest thing that might pull him away. They are in position with plenty of good receivers in high school rankings. Like, I'm not worried there. They got arguably best player in the country on the offensive side of the ball at a skill position on campus right now for an unofficial visit. And I don't think they get him. I think he sticks with Ohio State. But that's the level they're recruiting to. Tight end, very comfortable. Already got arguably the best one in the country. Kylan Fox is another kid. It's going to be them or UCF most likely at the end of the day. And he's an excellent ad, a very talented athlete. O-line is a position where I don't think they're desperate for a bunch of high school O-linemen. Like, they've got a very deep room. They're at, 18 is the current number, I think, in that room. They're only going to lose probably 2 or 3 after this year. So it's still a very deep number going into next year. That's a position they've built up.
With better talent.
They would love Sandamella.
Talent at the offensive line.
And they would love Sandamella. I'm not dismissing. The Sandamella development is probably the most disappointing thing to me that's happened in June for FSU recruiting. Because he's a kid that they've invested a ton of time with. I personally think very highly of what he's capable of being, especially as a center. And it would really suck if USC basically swooped in, one official out there, changed its whole narrative. Yeah. That would stink. That would be bad.
FSU's been involved with him longer, way longer than USC. USC offered him in February, and he's taken 2 visits there in total.
Yeah. And then John Daniels is a kid they're still in a good spot with. So that's offense. Like there's nothing offensively where I'm panic button at all. And I think they're going to add at receiver in the high school ranks, and that's good. And they're going to get a high school offensive lineman or two. But again, I don't think they're in desperate need for multiple high school offensive linemen. I don't think they're in love with the high school offensive line classes here.
True.
Who else have they brought in? Nair Daniels, probably a Georgia kid if Georgia wants him. Who else is there, Zach? Am I forgetting another offensive lineman that's been in here?
Ty Hilton's another guy that they like. Derek Plaus just decommitted from Penn State.
Yeah.
Like those are some other.
But they've always been a little slow with Derek Plaus. Like that's never like NC State and Miami have been ultra aggressive with that kid in comparison to FSU. And
True.
Ty Hilton's a kid that I think they like, but I don't know that they love him. Defensive side of the ball is a little bit more concerning. We've talked about linebacker pretty in depth. Defensive line, edge. Dylan Stevenson going to Stanford was a negative development, but that's a board where you have a few other names. The thing is, you got to hit on one. Yeah. It's not necessarily like there's one guy above all, but like if they land D.D. Holmes or somebody of that sort, then you're not as concerned with it because, again, it's a position they've had a great deal of success recruiting out of portal, and I think they like recruiting portal DNs.
I'm gonna write something,
but it is important
later in the week about how I think D.D. Holmes is the most important prospect visiting this weekend because of just I think he's the only edge rusher officially visiting Florida State this month, which says something to me, right? Because that's probably one of the FSU's biggest positions of need out of the high school ranks. And Dylan Stevenson was originally on the visitor list for this weekend before he committed to Stanford, and I think D.D. Holmes is someone FSU absolutely loves at edge. He stands at 6'6" and over 240 pounds. Like he's a good looking prospect. And I think he's very important for Florida State this weekend. Just wanted to throw that in because I know we were talking about that, how big of a position of need that is.
And landing a high school D end is important beyond acquiring the talent to combat the narrative. At this point, I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
Interior defensive line, they're loaded this year. They're obviously, a guy like Darrell Jackson, is he a one and done at FSU? Josh Farmer, does he move on? There's a few guys where, like, if they're coming back, it's not really a big concern for the immediate future, but you could also get wiped out of some really good talent there if everybody kind of plays at a high level and or decides to go pro and chase some money. So that's a weird position. I would like that position to be recruited a little better in the high school ranks. I love Nazir Johnson. Hated that he committed to Florida last week, but that was of no surprise. Basically forecasted that going into the weekend that was sort of something to keep an eye on. It happened. He is still expected in this coming weekend, but at the end of the day, Florida's led there for a good while before the commitment happened. That wasn't a rash decision by any stretch. Linebacker we've discussed. Secondary, they've got a ton of names on the board. They just got to close. It begins with Charles Lester. I still feel great about him. We'll get into him because he was a recent official. And there's a lot of other names, and the key is just acquiring 3 to 5 that they really like and getting guys of a certain talent and skill level that fits what they're trying to do. But like I find the whole panic right now just be kind of unfounded. Like I don't view the class as like hanging on the cliff and Billy hanging on. I think the panic is more so because Florida has surged, and that's why people want to panic. And like, good for Florida. That's awesome. Billy's recruiting at a really high level. They're nailing some positions. Their defensive front recruiting has been outstanding. Their linebacker recruiting, very good. Like I get it, but like it's two different schools recruiting for two different reasons. And I have a tough time of doing a whole, apples to apples comparison of it and hitting the panic button because, well, they're doing that in high school recruiting and FSU is.
And I think people view high school recruiting like just the sports fandom in us. Like we view high school recruiting sometimes as we would a game where like if you fall behind by too much, you can't catch up. And that's not necessarily how it works. Like the recruiting rankings, like what Florida's done has been remarkable. I do agree with you, Chris. That's where the trepidation comes from. Like where I think that's why fans are getting anxious in conjunction with FSU not having a commitment for 2 months. But you know what's about to happen? What we're going to talk about on this podcast is an official visit weekend coming up in a few days for Florida State that will probably be very fruitful. Because based on the last 2 years, Zach mentioned earlier, this is a strategy that Mike Norvell employs. He likes to have his official visit weekend at the very end of a cycle or a schedule, and he likes to have that at the end of the summer to build momentum that way. So Florida is like taking its shot, and it's been a remarkable shot. Florida State is now going to do something similar. You just have to wait. Like a few days, a few weeks, a month. I know that can be uncomfortable because you see FSU going from being a top 10 class to now in the teens. I get it. FSU historically does really well in this final weekend. They got 5 commitments, I think, last year out of official visitors in the final weekend of June. They got 5 the previous cycle as well. And that was with only 8 official visitors, I think, in each of those cycles. FSU has 15 coming in. 10 of them are uncommitted right now. And FSU just had an official visit weekend this past weekend as well. That was also really good. And I think, Zach, what would you say? FSU had 6 official visitors this past weekend. Byers-Sonone FSU gets at least 2 commitments from this past weekend.
I'd buy that.
Okay. So like, it's going to look markedly different in a month from now than it does right now. And not a whole lot is like changing for FSU in terms of like what the strategy is. Like, this is all just, they're doing it at their own pace. I think some of the hand wringing is a little over the top and is related to a rival doing really well. Chill out is what I would recommend. Like, it'll if they get to the season and the class is still in the teens and not looking good, then we can have the conversation of like, do they have enough on the board? But they have a really good nucleus right now, a really good foundation, and they're big game hunting as well. And like, they are keeping a spot open right now for a KJ Bolden, who's on campus at this moment, for Jeremiah Smith, who's on campus. Like, we'll talk about this, but like, they are in a better spot than I think it looks like at this moment. I think it'll end up ultimately being fine. Yes, there's some position groups that we want to hyper focus on that need to be better, have more robust, broader boards. The conversation of you guys talking earlier about the linebacker board made me think like, it's not just about strategy. It's about, are you maximizing your opportunities within that strategy? And I think that's kind of where the gray area comes in. Like,
yeah, and I would say Zach wholeheartedly believes they're not.
Yeah.
Which I actually don't disagree with. But I also think they're comfortable with basically the safety net of the portal at that position and needing to get somebody who can help them next year versus getting someone who can help them down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I think all 3 of us are somewhere on different sides of or somewhere within this spectrum, but we are viewing linebacker recruiting as it can be better. Like, we're not giving it a pass. None of us.
Same with D tackle.
Yeah. And defensive end. Like, we all are seeing it. And like, we cover this program at an extremely in-depth level. So like, we see it, we know what's happening. And so we also know like there's probably a little bit more to it than just the results that are showing right now. Just a matter of degrees. But anyways, I don't have to do the Byers-Sonone game. We can move on because we've already spent a lot of time on this, but I think it was a good topic with a lot of nuance, informative. Hopefully people listening took something away from it. So let's get into what happened this past weekend. FSU had 6 official visitors on campus. I'm going to run down them real quick and then we'll break down some intel. First off, 5-star Charles Lester, cornerback from Venice, 99 grade, which is pretty great. Top 20 prospect nationally. Someone that FSU has been recruiting and believed to be leading on for a very long time. Get him in there. He was all smiles afterwards. We'll talk about that in a minute. Xavier Mincy, cornerback, safety prospect from Daytona Beach, Mainland. Someone I'm extremely high on. 94 grade, top 150 prospect nationally. BJ Gibson, the lone commitment for FSU or committed prospect who visited this past weekend. He's got a 4-star grade, 89 grade overall, top 375 prospect nationally. We saw him at camp last weekend or 2 weekends ago. He was awesome in person. He was everything I think we thought he would be. FSU, I think, did really well there. Next up, Ricky Knight, listed as an athlete. He is viewed as a cornerback or safety prospect for FSU, roughly a top 400 prospect nationally with an 89 overall grade. Someone FSU has been recruiting for a long time. FSU is actually his first offer. That was a discussion point in his post-interview recap. Next up, Alex January, defensive lineman from Duncanville, Texas. If that name's familiar to you, FSU has a few other players on the roster from Duncanville. He has an 88.9 grade, so high-end 3-star, 461st nationally. And then finally, Kevin Levy from Cardinal Newman High School in West Palm Beach, where coincidentally, Ricky Knight just transferred to. They're cousins. Kevin Levy is a speedster, a track guy with a 10.6 100-meter dash. He has an 87 grade and is ranked in the top 700 nationally. So a lot to unpack there. Let's start off with the headliner, though, Charles Lester. Chris, I'll start with you because you were kind of leading the interview with Charles Lester. Let's talk about what he discussed, and then we'll kind of get into it from there. If Zach, you want to follow up with something.
Charles Lester is a kid who's been here 10 times, I think it is now. It's 9-10, it's right in that ballpark. He has an insanely good relationship with Mike Norvell, as does his family that comes with him, namely his aunt, who's played a huge role in raising him. He's ultra comfortable with FSU. The recruitment there has been focused largely for a good while now on Alabama, Georgia, and FSU. Colorado's hanging around and got him in for an official, so I've got to mention them as well. But the kid himself has consistently said his top three consists of Alabama, Georgia, and Florida State. I've had a crystal ball in for him for FSU for a good while. I feel very confident in that exiting the visit. I believe Zach entered one post-visit and felt that way even before the visit. Charles Lester's a kid that the main thing with him is when is he going to decide? He's kind of left that very open-ended. I think FSU's preference would be sooner rather than later, but we shall see.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think Florida State leads for Charles Lester. I thought they led for him going into the visit, and I think they really only furthered their lead after the OB. So I feel confident in my crystal ball.
We all have crystal balls in for him at this point, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. I think the big thing was kind of withstanding this June with official visits. He still has the one to Georgia left, but so far, I mean, we'll see what happens. Listen, a defensive prospect going to Georgia is something that makes your eyebrow. If I can make my singular eyebrow go up like The Rock, I would, but I can't. It has to be both. But it does make you wonder what's going to happen there. But FSU has withstood Alabama, it's withstood Colorado, which a kid from southwestern Florida. You always kind of wonder with Deion Sanders being involved there. It's seemingly withstood both of those. Probably in really good shape for Charles Lester right now. You got one more, and then I think you're good. Next up, let's talk about Zay Mincy. Chris, you talked to Zay as well. I'm a huge fan of his game. He's a tough kid to read, though. So
yes, that's exactly where I was going to start. Is like you talk to him and you're just not sure. I think he likes FSU and their scheme, and he'd be a corner for FSU for the record, even though he's listed as a safety for 24/7. He'd be a real physical press corner, big kid who's athletic. I think he likes what Coach Sertan is telling him with regards to what he can do at that position for FSU. But I don't get the warm and fuzzies that it's ultimately FSU. I think it's probably an in-state school. Florida and Miami are both involved as well. If I had to put money on it right now, I'd probably lean towards Florida. But again, kind of like Brendan referenced, tough to read. What, Zach?
No, it's just I was joking. Like all the fans freaking
out. Florida. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I agree. That's kind of what I wrote coming out of the weekend. I think he's a really tough read. Not a kid that really talks to the media besides like if you get him in person. So, I said in my article, like, I don't view FSU as the leader for him. I really like him, and I know Florida State loves him. He's like close to the top of their cornerback board. He's a really good prospect, but I'm not going to discount FSU's chances just because of the fact that he doesn't really, tip his hat to where he's leaning ever. But I think Florida's a school that he really likes, and that's kind of what he said when Brendan, Dane, and I went and visited Mainland High School last month and talked to him in person. He said Florida was a school that was standing out. So that's probably, I agree with you, Chris. I think that's where I would lean for Zay Mincy as of now. He heads to Miami next weekend. I think FSU is in a little better spot than Miami, just from talking to some people down there, but we'll see where things stand as June comes to a close for him.
Zach, remember what happened immediately after the Daytona Beach mainland visit?
I try not to remember.
The great steak and shake debacle of 2023. Steak and shake gate. Oh. Let's see. BJ Gibson, Zach, real quick. Any intel on him post visit?
Yeah, just wanted to share that I had spoken to some people close to him, and BJ Gibson, if you guys remember, was on an official visit to Stanford earlier in the month. And I'm told, Stanford actually impressed him a lot. They brought out, former Cardinal quarterback and NFL quarterback Andrew Luck to go meet with recruits on that visit weekend. Dylan Stevenson was there that weekend as well. But yeah, Gibson got the whole recruiting pitch about how Stanford, a degree from Stanford is worth a ton of money because it's a very prestigious university, which is true, and that resonated with Gibson. but I'm told there's nothing to worry about between, with his commitment to Florida State. He's very solid, especially after attending elite camp and then also, taking his OB last weekend. I think everything's all good there. FSU's in a great spot with him.
Let's talk a little Alex January, Chris. Do you want me to just play the interview audio?
I mean, he seemed really disinterested in the interview, and maybe it's just we're bad interviewers. Who knows? But yeah, I think it's Texas. His dad played ball there. His brother's name, I think, is Austin. Like the signs are pointing that direction. So,
show crystal ball for him right now. I would base something on Austin being the brother's name as a crystal ball pick.
FSU offered, I believe it was in February. Got him in for April for an unofficial. Got him in for an official here. Mom and dad have come on both visits, so they have given him plenty of time. I mean, he's had essentially 4 full days on campus getting a feel for FSU, getting to know it. And he is a kid they value, and he's a big body. He's a very good-looking kid, 6'4", 3 1/4 roughly. He'd be excellent for what they like to do on the interior of their defensive line. But, yeah, I think he stays home, basically.
And finally, Zach, let's talk about the South Florida teammates now, and Cousins, Ricky Knight, and Kevin Levy.
Yeah, I think FSU knocked it out of the park with both of those prospects. I logged a 24/7 Sports crystal ball for Kevin Levy right after the visit week ended. I heard things went really well with him, and I like where FSU sits. He has an OV scheduled to Illinois this weekend, and then after that OV, I expect him to go into decision-making mode and likely announce a decision earlier on in the month of July. And then Ricky Knight, heading into the visit, Miami led on the crystal ball for him. They're the lone prediction via Steve Wiltfong from earlier on in the spring. And, I think Miami's definitely in the mix, but I think FSU's right there. They're right there challenging Miami for that top spot in Ricky Knight's recruitment, especially after the OV. I wrote that I felt better about where FSU stood in his recruitment following the official visit. And, he heads to Miami this weekend. So that'll be the ultimate, deciding factor as to where this thing heads. In my opinion, I think this is a classic FSU versus Miami recruiting battle. And we'll see kind of where things stand after he heads to Coral Gables this weekend. But right now, I'm liking where FSU's positioning themselves with Ricky Knight.
Yeah, and just real quick on the weekend, guys. Mincy wasn't definitive on decision date, but it sounded like it'd probably be July, August, maybe at the latest. But he did mention he could take in-season visits as well. But I think he will decide before the season rolls around. Knight, I believe, is going to be a July decision. And talking to him, Kevin Levy sounds along a similar timeline. Alex January sounded like after these visits are done, sit down, decide, make a decision with his family. So Charles Lesser's to be determined.
All right, so let's move to what's happening right now, and that is FSU has 3 unofficial visitors on campus, 3 big-time unofficial visitors, and I don't want to I don't want to glimpse over that these are unofficial visits. You still have the OVs in your back pocket for 3 really important prospects: KJ Bolden, 5-star safety; Jeremiah Smith, 5-star wide receiver; and then Micah Boganowski, who is FSU's one of their higher linebackers on the board. We thought it was an official visit going into yesterday, and then found out that it was an unofficial. So first off, Chris, the value of that, of having those OVs in your back pocket still when you have 3 priority guys on multi-day visits, big deal, correct?
Yeah, I mean, the hope is that you get them back here for an official. Also, you're limited in total amount of officials you're allowed to have in a given recruiting calendar year currently based on NCAA rules, but that may change here very soon. So, yeah, there's value to it. But I think also it just shows that, the machine's running at a pretty good clip in the sense of their ability to get guys on campus who they value highly.
Jordan in the chat on our YouTube channel asked how many silent commits, if any, we would guess they have.
I don't like the word silent commit. Do I think there's guys who have told FSU they're coming, they're not public? Yes. How many?
By or Sonone, 2, over under 2.
I was going to say at least 2.
The fact that we can talk about multiple,
I'll buy.
Okay. Ooh, fine.
I think they feel comfortable about certain guys ending up in this class. I guess is the best way I can put it.
Zach's mumbling. You're on mute. I don't know if you wanted to.
Zach would probably say Xandamela fit this before.
No, I was going to say you're predicting a top 5 class, Chris, is what I'm
No,
hearing?
I'm not predicting a top 5 class because we don't value portal rankings like we should. Therefore, it doesn't impact class rankings.
Wow.
The
industry, not just us, the industry.
Yeah, it is skewing, but it's a slow burn. Okay, so Any intel on? Oh, I don't want to glance over this too much, but Bolden, Smith, Boganowski, Zach, that we wanted to share or any significance. One thing before I throw it to you, big reason for getting Bolden down here this week is to further develop the relationship with Pat Surtain, and that specifically, like that's a big. What I'm told, like that's a big factor that FSU has. Is they want to really harness that relationship, that dynamic with those two. So that's really the objective exiting these couple of days.
Yeah, I'll just lay out some of what's occurred so far. Jeremiah Smith was first to arrive yesterday around midday and was greeted by Mike Norvell and the entire coaching staff, per usual with any big prospect, with them waiting inside the Moore Center with the war chant blaring. It was a big welcome. And then Michael Boganowski also arrived yesterday and started his visit. Like we said, he originally had said it was an official visit, but we had heard that it's actually an unofficial visit. And all these guys are expected to stay on campus multiple days, which is big. And then KJ Bolden arrived in town yesterday on Monday, but didn't start his visit with Florida State until Tuesday morning. And he actually attended FSU's workout / practice on Tuesday morning, and then is going to continue with his visit the rest of the day. And I expect him to stay in at least into Wednesday.
Okay, so good stuff for FSU there. That will take us into where we're going to land. We're going to spend the rest of the podcast talking about this. I think 20 minutes is the goal. I don't want this to be a marathon podcast, but I want to try to get everything in right now. Kid show. And that is official visits coming up. FSU has 16 currently that we have marked down. And we'll see if some of those guys who've committed elsewhere or trending elsewhere end up happening. But that's what we have right now is 16. I'm just going to go down in order first off, we're going to talk about committed guys, and then we'll go in order of just where they're ranked nationally and just discuss what we're hearing on them, how those recruitments are trending, etc. So of the committed guys visiting, starting off, you have Landon Thomas, 5-star tight end from Colquitt County, top 30 prospect nationally. You have Luke Kromenhoek, 95 overall grade, top 150 prospect quarterback. Real quick, we haven't talked about that Elite 11, guys. Sounds like he did very well for himself out there, more or less a consensus, like top 4 guy, top 5 performer. And that was with kind of a dud of a day too. So
yeah, he had a bad pro day, which was the middle day of it all, but he performed very, very well. Everything outside of that one event.
I talked to Luke last night about it. We'll have a story this week on Noles 24/7. But yeah, he was really disappointed about that day too. But said he kind of locked in. Like a funny quote, he's like, every other day, the first day he was or the first and second day on the bus over to the fields where they were competing, he was just joking around with everyone. But the third day, after his disappointing day 2, he said he was completely locked in, like just wanted to have like his best performance. And he did on the 7-on-7. I think he threw 3 touchdowns and maybe only had like 4 incomplete passes that entire day. So really impressive stuff from Luke, and you'll hear more from him and his experience at Elite 11. Also, he'll preview what's to come for his official visit this weekend on Noles 24/7.
Super impressive. Like, there's only so much you can take away from the Elite 11s, but the fact that he responded well to a pretty poor day 2 after a really good day 1 too, like could have been easy for him to circle the drain. Like, I think that's a really encouraging sign of who Luke is, and that's probably my biggest takeaway from that. He went from being one of the worst performers on day 2 to one of the best on day 3 and one of the best overall during that stretch. So FSU, hey, good at this recruiting thing and evaluating thing, and but let's freak out because it's middle of June. I digress. Next up for the commitments, Tawaski Abrams. We'll probably stop there and talk about that real quick because that is worth veering off for a minute or two. 4-star wide receiver from Dunbar High School in Fort Myers, Florida. Top 250 guy nationally. Speedster, does a lot of things really well. Bit of a project because he's a little undersized, but his film is fun. He's part of a really good wide receiver class for FSU currently, but UF is putting a full court press on him. Zach, who did he tell recently? I think reporters post visit that 70% committed to Florida State right now.
Yeah, he had told Blake Alderman from our UF site that he's like 70 or 75% committed to Florida State. So I don't know what that means, but he'll be on campus this weekend, and I think that's the storyline to watch. is kind of just where things stand between FSU and Tawaski Abrams after his OV this weekend. FSU's maintained that they feel good about him and that they're not super worried, but he keeps taking visits to other schools and he hasn't been on FSU's campus since he committed to FSU back in January, I think.
January, sometime in the winter. Yeah.
Which is crazy to think about, right? A kid from in-state. He's made an unofficial visit out to Colorado in that time.
Took an official to A&M, Texas A&M.
An official to A&M. He's been to Florida. So he's been to Florida unofficially too. So, I'm really interested to see what happens after this weekend, just kind of where things stand between the two sides. Is he done with his recruitment? I know he told the UF site that he's likely going to try to be done with his recruiting process by the end of July and just kind of lock in on his season and not visit any other schools, wherever he commits to or decides to end up. But yeah, I'm interested to see what happens after this weekend.
My light just doesn't want to cooperate. That's what you just saw.
Oh, I thought you were doing like something symbolic of the recruitment, like
it's like it's possessed. No, with Abrams, the comments lend themselves to a kid that seems to really be looking around, but at the same time, he hasn't backed off the pledge, so we shall see.
He hasn't acted like a firm commit since he committed, and that's we've been pretty consistent on that, and we'll see what happens. Like, I do like his game. I also think FSU is recruiting at such a high level at wide receiver. Ron Dugans everyone was freaking out about him a couple years ago. It's like, they're good at this recruiting thing. Relax, it's mid-June again. I digress once again. But they're recruiting so well at wide receiver that, like, if you're going to lose someone in this class, that's probably the position group you can afford to lose on that and still feel good because you have 3 other really good ones in the boat, and the prospects on the board are also really good. Speaking of prospects on the board at wide receiver who are really good, Camden Fryer, official visiting, 4-star recruit, top 400 nationally, 89 grade. Love that kid's game. He's a lot of fun. Someone who's probably going to be underrated in the rankings just because he doesn't camp a lot. He's been committed to Florida State for a while. It is what it is. I think he got a really good one with a legacy there. And then finally, CJ Hurd, another long-time commitment from Woodward Academy in Atlanta, Georgia. 89 grades, so just outside of composite 3-star status. Safety, DB's been dealing with a hamstring injury. But yeah, those are your commitments.
Yeah, and Hurd was here 2 weeks ago for 7-on-7 with his team.
I think it's interesting how they're utilizing, sprinkling in some of the commitments. Obviously, Tawaski Abrams is a different situation because you're trying to figure out what's going on there. But like Crum & Hawk, Camden Fryer, CJ Hurd, and Landon Thomas are interesting because like a guy like Cam Davis told me he's officially visiting Florida State in December. I know some of the other guys have said that, like maybe Joe Maury Flagg, the 3-star defensive line commit, was the same way. So just interesting, who they decided to bring in from their commit list. I think guys like CJ Hurd and Luke Kromenhoek are obvious choices because both of those guys are like mouthpieces for the program. They're going to help you recruit the rest of the uncommitted guys that we'll talk about in a second throughout the weekend. But yeah, and then a guy like Landon Thomas is a 5-star prospect that flipped from Georgia. So that's always, he's always a good guy to have around.
And let us not forget, Luke is officially visiting right now because he can actually grow long hair because he goes to a military school.
The other way around. He's officially visiting because he has longer hair and he's going to have to cut it.
This is the time of year where he's actually able to do it and he wants to do it for photo shoots. So that's part of the reason he took a summer official. I mean, he was upfront about that. I absolutely love it. Cracks me up.
All right. Let's get into the uncommitted prospect breakdown here. Start off with Jonathan Daniels, 4-star offensive tackle prospect. Would you say tackle or guard? It doesn't matter for this moment. 6'3", 280 pounds. He's from Pine Forest in Pensacola, Florida. Got a 95 grade, top 100 prospect nationally. Some of that is inflated with another service ranking him higher than most others, but someone that FSU's been recruiting pretty actively for a while. What do we got there, fellas?
He's also been at Georgia and Kentucky. He was supposed to go to LSU, but that one got scratched because of a family situation. That was earlier in the month. I think right now Georgia is probably the main competitor there, but he's been leaning FSU to entirety. We went and saw him late spring, right around the time he played his spring game. We actually went to his spring game, which Alex Atkins was at, and FSU was certainly the club leader at that point. I have not seen feedback on the Georgia visit, which happened this past weekend, so I'm not sure if that maybe shifted things at all for him, but yeah, prior to, it definitely was FSU.
Nothing to add, Zach. Okay, moving on. Jason Zandamella. We've talked a little bit about him so far from Clearwater Academy International, same school as Lucas Simmons, someone that FSU's invested a ton of time in. He's a 4-star offensive lineman, interior offensive lineman, possibly a center, 95 grade, rounding up, top 120 prospect nationally. So someone who's very good. And typically you don't want to take a lot of flyers on interior offensive linemen, but when one is of this caliber in the high school ranks, yes, I think you make a play for him. We are monitoring this, I think is the best way to say it, to see whether he still shows up for the official visit. Zach wrote about it today on Knowles247.com. You can check that out if you're a subscriber. If not, good time to mention 50% off. What's the promo right now, Chris? 50% off? I can't remember.
It's 50% annual, and I believe it is upgradable for monthlies.
Good deal. But you can read Zach's thoughts on the importance of keeping that visit on the docket. Now let's go down to Ricardo Jones from Warner Robins in mid-Georgia. He's a 4-star safety, 93.9 grade, top 150 prospect nationally. Film's a lot of fun, big build, prototypical safety. What you think of a safety, big physical guy like that is Ricardo Jones. That is his game. Recently, some buzz that he might be leaning towards Clemson, where he was visiting recently. So what's our read on this one, fellas, and where do we think he kind of stands for FSU?
I think he's one to watch for possibly not making it this weekend. I would just keep it at that. I mean, I think Clemson leads for him, and he's probably going to make a decision like really soon after this official visit weekend for Florida State. We'll see if he makes it in. That's one to watch heading into this weekend. And I'm not super worried because I think FSU sits in a good spot for multiple DBs, but he's a guy that we've talked about a ton over the last several months because Florida State has prioritized him a lot, dating back to like January when he came on that visit before the dead period. But yeah, I want to see if he makes it in, and if he does, Florida State will have an opportunity to try and change his mind from Clemson because I definitely think that's where he's leaning right now. But if not, then I think that's telling, right? Like he's just going to go to Clemson.
Yeah, Brandon Huffman, one of our West Coast analysts, caught up with him out west here the last couple of days. I believe he was out there maybe at OT7 over the weekend. And at that point, he did say he was going to decide on June 27th, which for those keeping count is what, a week from today or yesterday? And it's a week from today. And that it would come after his FSU visit. So at that point, he was still intending to do it. But yes, as Zach has mentioned, there's a little bit of chatter that maybe it doesn't happen. FSU definitely has to make up ground on Clemson. Clemson is a clubhouse leader at this point. They have been since the beginning of the month when he took an official visit there. That's the only other official visit he took.
It kind of goes back to the conversation we had at the beginning of the podcast with the strategy and where the official visits are placed. Moving on, Jalewis Solomon, athlete, but more of a DB prospect for FSU from Ellaville, Georgia, at Shelley County. So small school, small town in South Georgia. 6 foot 185, top 200 prospect nationally, 92.5 grade. Someone FSU likes a ton. His film is fun, a lot of athleticism. Interesting note that he's told Dane Draper he is being recruited at Auburn, where he just was, I think, unofficially a few days ago.
Yesterday.
As a wide receiver. So it's kind of an interesting to see. And Auburn is fairly close for him as well. But I think FSU and Auburn really stand out right now. What intel do you guys have on Jalewis Solomon?
Well, earlier in the month, it was FSU South Carolina, and he took an official to South Carolina back on June 2nd. He also fit a Kentucky official in there, but I don't think Kentucky's really a factor here in comparison to others. Auburn has really come on. He's actually taken 2 unofficials there in recent weeks. He has some family ties to that program. I would say they've surged with him, made a major push. I don't think they've locked up an official yet for him. So the interesting thing is, does he visit FSU this weekend officially as expected? And does he make a decision soon after? Because if he does, that would probably lend itself to FSU and South Carolina still being the 2 tussling it out. But if he delays, waits, and takes an official to Auburn, then yeah, they have really made a move in that recruitment. And Auburn was not really into discussion back on June 2nd when he went to South Carolina. It was very much FSU, South Carolina at that point. That's happened over the last 20 or so days.
Let's move to tight end, Kalen Fox. He's listed as an athlete at 24/7 Sports, but viewed at Florida State as a tight end prospect, although certainly versatile. 6'4", 208 pounds. We saw a mile per hour tracker from the other day. He was in over 20 miles per hour, which at 200 plus pounds is impressive.
21 miles per hour.
21. All right. So nationally, he's ranked 225th, got a 91.8 grade overall. So still well in 4-star territory. This seems like it's shaping in, Chris, to be a FSU UCF battle.
Yeah, I'd agree with that wholeheartedly. I think he likes Gus Malzahn a lot. I think UCF's made a great deal of effort with him. I did notice UCF had a tight end on campus last weekend, which lends itself to sort of the backup plan. One would hope FSU could beat out UCF for a guy that they do seemingly like. The one thing I would mention here is Landon Thomas and him are very good friends. Fox is originally from Valdosta. He's obviously up at Grayson for high school ball, but I think he would tell you Valdosta is more hometown for him. And him and Landon have known each other for a long time. I believe they grew up playing Pee Wee football basically together.
So for the comment section, yeah, I know my hair looks Dragon Ball Z-ish. It will be cut within the next 2 hours here. I couldn't put any product in it because I didn't want Dallas's blades to get all gunky, you know? Can't do that to your barber. Have to be considerate.
Move on, Brendan.
Micah Danzy, athlete from Tallahassee, plays at Florida State University School. 4-star prospect, top 250 nationally, speedster. Got to see him in person a couple of weeks ago. I think we were all fairly impressed with what he could do as a kind of versatile, malleable piece there for FSU. Zach, if I had to put guys on commit watch this weekend, I guess I would put Danzy on there, but I want to get your thoughts and intel on where that recruitment stands.
Yeah, I logged a crystal ball for Florida State to land Micah Danzy earlier on in the month, and I still feel good about where FSU sits in that recruitment. Florida and Miami are both in the mix for him, but I think they're both wanting to get him on campus in December for an official visit, whereas FSU's the only known known official visit.
It's an actual kids show.
Official destination for him in the month of June, and FSU's recruiting him very heavily. They want to pair him up with Cam Davis as their running back class in 2024, and I think they have a great shot to do that right now.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning Christian Clark, who came in for an official earlier in the month for FSU running back. I think I'd project him to Texas. I think Zach would probably agree with that. Yep. Oregon's also in the mix, some others as well. From a second running back perspective, Danzy, he's viewed more as an offensive athlete. I think he'll fall into that category for FSU. And I think, truthfully, it's what they want in that second spot. They would love Christian Clark, too. He's super talented, and he also is an offensive athlete in addition to being a running back. But I think it's much more likely Danzy ends up being the guy. It is worth mentioning Danzy did show up for the elite camp fresh off of a track meet. He was still hot and heavy in national track-related stuff. He's a high-level track athlete. And FSU was really happy he showed up, thought he was just going to hang out, and he went out and competed. And I think that made a solid impression upon FSU, just if the kid has kind of the right makeup.
Moving on to defensive tackle Nasir Johnson from Dublin, Georgia, top 250 prospect nationally. That's very south rural Georgia, small town there. He just committed to Florida this past weekend. We talked about that. Buyer Sonone, guys, sponsored by
the Turner Group.
Buyer Sonone Nasir Johnson shows up to Florida State this weekend for his OV.
He said he was when he left UF a day after committing to UF. He committed to UF on Saturday, left on Sunday, and said he was still going to FSU. So I'll go ahead and say, yeah, I guess he will. I'll buy it that he'll show up.
Also known, I think Florida's going to try their best to try and nix the visit. That's what I heard after from UF side. I think they definitely do not want him to take the FSU official.
All right,
I don't think it matters in the end.
You think he sticks with Florida?
Yeah, at least for the foreseeable future.
D.D. Holmes out of Gonzaga High School in Washington, D.C. Isn't that where Marcus Lewis, who was the DB recruit FSU, the DB prospect that we all really like, 4-star guy?
I'll look it up because I'm not sure offhand.
He was with Tavares McFadden. He was that class. Anyways,
I wouldn't know.
It doesn't matter. Yeah,
Zach was 12.
D.D. Holmes, 4-star recruit, top 300 prospect nationally. Zach, your most important visitor of the weekend?
Yeah, I just think he's one of FSU's more realistic edge targets. I like, his tape. I think he's a really good prospect. He's 6'6", 240 pounds. He's also considering Maryland, Rutgers, South Carolina, and UF. among other schools. He's going to take 5 official visits this month. D.D. Holmes does not talk much to the media, like at all.
That's an understatement.
Yeah. Basically, to put this in perspective, he visited FSU, I think, in March, and it took me about a month to get him to go on record about that.
He's taken 3 officials this month. I don't think he's done an interview about any of them.
Yeah. So I confirmed, visit destinations for him back when I talked to him. I think it was like late April. And after that, I don't think he's gone on record since. So yeah, it's been tough to get a hold of him, but we know that he's expected to be on an official visit to Florida State this weekend. And FSU feels they're in a good spot within his recruitment. I think, I'm really, really interested to see how things go, and if he'll talk to us after the visit.
Doesn't sound like he will.
It's all you, Zach. All you, buddy.
We'll have people planted all over. Well, I won't be there this weekend, but you guys will be planted all over the place to try to catch him if he slips out the side. James Madison II.
The president.
Not the James Madison.
For the record, Marcus Lewis was Gonzaga. Brendan was correct on that.
Yeah, buddy. James Madison II. I once described that 2016 secondary with Marcus Lewis and Tavares McFadden as rising sophomores, along with I think Levante Taylor and Derwin James was back there, obviously, as a potential lineup of death with what they could do. Didn't really work out that way, guys.
The kiss of death.
Them were the days.
James Madison II as an 89.7 grade, put him in 4-star territory if you round up. 364th nationally, someone FSU's been in on for a while. Big wide receiver, still kind of I don't want to say developmental, but he's an ascending prospect with his best football probably still ahead of him. Still kind of raw, but very toolsy. FSU's been in on this for a while, Zach. I'll let you talk about this since he's a fellow 954 boy like yourself.
Yeah, I mean, FSU loves recruiting prospects from St. Thomas Aquinas High School in Fort Lauderdale, and James Madison is one of their top receiver targets. Despite them already having 4 committed, he stands at 6'3", 190 pounds, and has a 6'8" wingspan. So they like his range, and he's the guy that FSU's felt pretty confident with throughout his recruitment. They've gotten him on campus several times over the past year, probably close to 8 or whatever, between 8 or game visits and unofficial visits and junior days. And now he'll take his OV this weekend. I think it's between FSU, Louisville, Missouri. Those are like the 3 schools most involved with James Madison at this point. I think he's originally from Missouri, so that's the tie there. That's why they're so involved in his recruitment. And then Louisville does a pretty good job recruiting South Florida. So
do we think, Zach, if FSU, like if he wanted to commit this weekend, do you think FSU would accept it?
Yes. I believe that anyone they're bringing in for an OV, they'd accept a commitment from, unless they, do something on the official visit that raises like a red flag. But yeah.
That's never happened before.
Never. So yeah, I think anyone would be a take. Obviously, things are situational, right? Like if they have 6 DBs on campus and 5 commit, the 6th one, like they might have to, take a look at it. But
they could play actual musical chairs.
Yeah, that could potentially happen if there are a bunch of commitments that happen live. But no, I think if you're looking at uncommitted guys taking OVs to FSU, it's safe to assume that they're takes.
Another big wide receiver FSU is supposed to host this weekend is Elijah Moore from Maryland, Good Counsel High School in Olney, Maryland. Don't know where that is. He's 6'4", 190 pounds, 4-star prospect as well, 89 grade, top 450 nationally. I don't really know much about his recruitment, so please enlighten me, fellows.
Ohio State and Florida State. It's those 2. He visited Ohio State earlier in the month. I would say Ohio State leads at this point. Don't think he's set a decision date, but it's been pretty focused on just those 2. So one would seem to believe that if he does make it in this weekend, a decision would come soon after the officials. Ranking wise, like he's a kid I think that can trend up. Like he's got good film.
That's strange, Chris.
He's an enjoyable kid to watch. Plus, not to fluff the pillow, and you guys know how I'm not a Buckeyes fan, but they know what they're doing at receiver recruiting.
Do they develop well at receiver?
Yes, they do. Brian Hartline's very good at his job.
Yeah, that's a strange for FSU and Ohio State battle for a guy to be on the fringe of 3-4 stars.
Yeah. And he appears to be a take for Ohio State. He's got 2 crystal balls there. So,
yeah.
Finally, we mentioned him a little bit earlier from Oviedo, or as Chris likes to say it, Oviedo. It's a very,
Oviedo!
very Spanish style.
I call it Oviedo. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, no, sorry. It's a Ocoee that you butchered.
Yeah,
recently.
there you go. That's correct.
Ty Hilton, offensive tackle prospect, 86.5 grade, 895th nationally. Chris, what should people be on the lookout there with his recruitment?
4th of 4 officials this month began at Penn State, and then he made his tour of the state. He went to Miami, then Florida last week, now Florida State. He's been to FSU a few times. He likes Alex Atkins a lot. I don't know that FSU loves him, if I'm just being upfront. I think FSU likes him.
I think FSU would take him. I think they love him.
You think if they got Zandamela and Jonathan Daniels, they would still take Ty Hilton?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I'm not going to argue against that idea. I'm just not entirely convinced of it.
I think
I've never felt that FSU's in a rush to use a lot of numbers on high school offensive linemen.
I think 3 is their number. I think
okay.
If they land 3, then they're good.
We don't think they're getting a guy like Nair Daniels, who's one of the few others that visited this month.
Probably so not. If he's a take at Texas or Georgia, I would assume that he's probably not going to Florida State.
Yeah. So, but he's a kid. A little bit. I would describe him a little bit slender, but the frame's probably good enough to bulk up, and he should be fine long term. Pretty long arms. Like there's enough solid attributes there that you like what you're getting with a kid who probably has a little bit of swing lineman capability. Nice, smart kid, checks a lot of those kind of boxes. Hey, I almost made a whole podcast without saying that.
Bro, so how much did you love? Which recruit was it that said check the boxes? Was it Ricky Knight?
Yeah, I think it was Ricky. And I'm already a big fan of Ricky, so
he checked that box.
Love
too.
The competitive dog. So
okay.
But Hilton's a good player. I think probably I don't want to say it's definitely FSU or Florida because he talks everybody up when he visits. And I think he's legitimately visiting places where he does really like the position coach and he's very comfortable with the program as a whole.
We flew through this for our standards to recap an official visit weekend and preview one, and then also have like a 20-minute discourse on the state of FSU recruiting. This is remarkable. I thought 100 or 120 hour and 20 minutes is about what we would do. So we're a little bit ahead of schedule. Let's wrap this up soon. Do a few buyers to known sponsored by
the Turner Group,
and we'll get out of here. Buyers to known. Tawaski Abrams sticks with Florida State.
Also known that for now.
I'm gonna buy.
Ooh.
Also known it. I think Zach's just playing
devil's advocate.
If you have any buyers to knowns, get them in the chat real quick because we're about to wrap this up. Buyers to known, FSU gets at least 6 combined commitments from last weekend and this upcoming weekend official visitors.
Buy.
Chris is not listening.
No, I am listening. I'm calculating.
Oh.
He's computing.
You said 6 or more?
Charles Lesser just announced that will be committing on July 29th.
There we go, kids. We've got a date. To be determined. It's now July 29th.
Another fork in the road?
6 is a really good number, Sonone. I'm proud of you. You're very good at that. Was it 6 or more?
Yeah.
I'll buy.
Okay, I think I'll buy as well. So historically, I put this on the board the other day. I think I mentioned earlier, but like maybe you can help me with calculations, Chris. They think they got like 5 out of 8 official visitors to commit last
which
July,
is 62.5%.
And then 6 out of 8 the year before.
75%.
So and now they have 10. They have 10 uncommitted players this weekend, or 11. Excuse me. No, 10.
So let's say they have 10 and they go 60%. That's 6.
Okay.
Plus last weekend, where I think Leicester is kind of one that I feel very confident in, and then maybe another one or maybe 2. Zach's a little more confident than me, and 3. So yeah.
Yeah. But point being is I think there's a lot of meat on the bone when it comes to us probably doing pre-writes and recruiting commitment stories and stuff like that. Like that probably will be something we spend the next few weeks on. Buyers to known, FSU will finish with a top 10 class nationally.
I'm going to Sonone that. I think they'll be right outside the top 10. Yeah, it's tough, but that's where I'm at right now.
I can't remember. Does 24/7 cap the total number that equates into that calculation? Is it capped at like 21 or 22? Because if it is, I think they can. The issue is I don't think their high school class is going to exceed that number.
I think they're going to have like
classes
23 to 24 high school commits.
I guess I'll buy it.
I think I will too, Chris. It will be close. I think they will. It's really going to be interesting to see. They are recruiting at a different level in high school than they have in the past years, and I know it doesn't feel like that. Like I've teased some people here today about the mid-June panic. It doesn't feel that way, but like they are going to keep a spot open for Bolden. They'll keep a spot open for Jeremiah Smith. Like JoJo Schrader is still on the board. Like there are guys who they are hopeful to close on, and what's different now than what's been the case the last few years, like when we talk about them closing on guys in late June, 2 classes ago, we were getting like a Kanaya Charlton. And I like Kanaya a lot. I still think highly of him, but he was picking between Florida State and Georgia Tech. You're now battling Ohio State for guys. You're now battling Georgia. You're now battling Alabama. Like it's changed, and the players have more leverage to like dictate terms and times of commitments. So it feels a little bit different. FSU is in it with guys where they need to have another good season to keep building, improve the legitimacy of the growth of this program. And I am confident they're going to be good on the field this season. So with that in mind, I'm confident they're going to close on some guys or have a chance at the bitter end with some guys to win out on some battles that maybe we're not expecting right now. And they're positioning themselves to do so. So I'll buy it because I think they'll be, if they win on the field and take care of business, in a better spot than it feels like they are here on June 20th. So that's my logic. I think that's everything. I didn't see any buyer Sinones in the chat, so we'll get out. Cool?
Yep.
All right. For Chris Nee, Zach Blostein, I'm Brendan Sinone's been on the bench. Thanks to losing my voice here, Chattanooga Whiskey, as well as the Turner Group for sponsoring this episode. Congrats to Luke Romanhawk on his top finish at Elite 11, top 5 finish at Elite 11, and shout out to the X's and O's fellas. Once again, check out that show with Mike Norvell. An amazing episode. Great content there. So thanks everyone for watching, all 100 and 200 of you. Wow. All right, sticking the landing. Bye.